I was just visited by the ghost of Projects Present. And you might be thinking, Ava, don't you mean the ghost of Christmas Present? No, he was the ghost of Projects Present, and he was very disappointed. Currently, my Beetlejuice house is in pieces and all over the studio, and I guess he thought it should already be done. I've tried to tell him that I've been busy, the holiday season is just, there's a lot going on. He didn't seem to care for my excuses and let me know that Ghost of Project's Future will be coming soon, and I need to be prepared. How should I prepare? Well, I'm going to be going over the timeline I wrote a while ago. Yes, the timeline of what I should have already finished. I haven't looked at this in a while and I'm a little scared. But hopefully, if I get myself prepared, by the time the Ghost of Project's Future shows up, I might have some questions that she can answer. I also learned that the Ghost of Project's Future also enjoys graveyards and headstones, so thankfully I've been working on Beetlejuice's headstone recently in a live stream, and in this video I'm going to finish it up. So hopefully by the end of this video I'll be completely prepared for the visit from the future ghost, and maybe get some answers on whether I'm going to hit my 2026 deadline for the Beetlejuice project. So without further ado, let's get started on the headstone. And as I said before, this headstone began in a live stream, so that's what you're going to see now. I have edited together the clips from the live stream that kind of show how this project got started, and I put a gray square over my face cam because my words are not going to match up. Of course, I had to show you how these skeletons started out, but thankfully I'm going to cut them apart, so it doesn't really matter that currently his spine is going through the back of his skull. The basic shape of the headstone, which you can see samples of it over to the right, is going to be made with foam board. I'm going to do a couple layers of foam board. I started with one large layer that I'm going to double up, and then I'm going to make a smaller layer because it does look like maybe some kind of stone that's been built up at the bottom and it's thinner at the top, which a lot of Tim Burton designs are the other way around. They're thinner at the bottom and then larger at the top. So I thought this was an interesting design to work with. And then of course we have the skeletons and the wings, which I think are very much like plague symbolism, like the Black Plague, which I think Beetlejuice does reference living through, although as we know from the second movie, he was poisoned. So didn't really die during plague times. But I do think that had a little bit to do with some of the inspiration for how this headstone was created. So I'm continuing to carve away at the layers of foam board, and I decided to remove the foam board paper from the back and the front. This is going to make it a bit easier for me to carve into the foam board with my craft knife. This will give it a more rocky texture on the edge. At the top, it kind of looks like there's a bite taken out of the top of the headstone, but I did that to make a bit more room for the rib cage of the skeleton that's going to show up at the top. So once I have the main headstone carved out, I can go ahead and make a base for the bottom of the headstone. As you can see in my example, it's a pretty thick base. However, I am only going to be using one layer of foam board because it is already fairly tall and I don't want to make it too tall because it will just kind of overpower the very small grave I've already carved into the hill that sits underneath the Beetlejuice house. I used Fabrifix glue and hot glue for putting this together, and the two glues together will hold over time. So now I can go ahead and work on the wings that are going to be on the creature that sits on top of the headstone. I wanted to go ahead and work on those during the live stream so they had time to dry. I'm using small sections of toothpick, and this is just being glued to computer paper. And the reason that the toothpick pieces aren't touching is so that once it's dry, I'll be able to kind of manipulate the paper to make the wings look more folded and have ripples. So once all the toothpicks were glued down, I added more wood glue on top of the toothpicks and around the toothpicks, and I'm going to add a piece of tissue paper on top. I thought if I added another piece of computer paper, it might be too thick, and so adding a piece of tissue paper is going to cover everything up, hide those toothpicks, but still allow me to manipulate the paper once everything is dry. I put that to the side for now and got back to working with my skeleton's hand. Now, I tried many ways to try and figure out these skeletons' hands, but all of them are put on backwards. So they all had to be cut, or I had to cut it off at the shoulder joint and then remove the ball joint and glue it on. Like there just wasn't a good way to fix these skeleton arms. I know most people are just using them for decoration, but I did want their hands to look correct, especially since they're pointing down. To fold back the tiny plastic fingers, I used the tip of my hot glue gun, and I warmed up the fingers and then folded them under and held them in place until they cooled off. I'm going to try and get all 3 figures. As you can see, my figures in comparison to the headstone are much larger. If I had had figures that were about half this size, so maybe half scale skeletons, it would have worked a little bit better. However, I'm going to try and make it work, and we did do a poll during the live stream on if I should just add the skulls and leave the arms and shoulders off, but the live stream voted that we do full arms and shoulders and heads, so I'm trying to fit everyone onto the headstone. By this time in the live stream, the wings had dried, so I cut them out with a pair of scissors, and I did leave them together at first, but eventually I did cut them apart so it was easier for me to figure out where they needed to go on the back of my skeleton, and it did work pretty well. I could manipulate the wings and make them bend and look a little bit more folded. Next time I probably would leave a little bit of a larger gap in between the, I guess I would say, the fingers of the wings and the main hand joint that went up. I don't know if that makes sense, but I didn't have a ton of movement. So just kind of, if you want to make wings like this, experiment with how far you put your toothpicks to the main line of the wing, and then you can kind of figure out what will work for the effect that you want. Before ending the stream, I did want to play around with the words, so I used a letter template to try and figure out how I was going to lay everything out. But that's all the time I had for the headstone that day. That's where the live stream ended, so now I'm going to complete the headstone, get it all ready for the actual grave. Hopefully the ghost of Project Future will approve of this headstone and maybe feel a little bit more comfortable to give me some answers at the end of this video. The next time I was able to work on this project, the first thing I did was fold those little fingers back and get the arms attached to the skeletons. I ended up cutting off quite a bit of their rib cage, so really you only see their shoulder bone and maybe 1 or 2 ribs. So they don't have a lot showing, they're just kind of growing out of the side of the headstone, but I do think it works for the look we're going for. It's definitely not going to be an exact replica. After everything was glued in place, I used my hot glue gun to make sure everything was supported, and then I realized I had a gaping cavity inside of the top skeleton's sternum, inside of his rib cage, and so I needed to fill that in with something before I started to paint, because it was going to be impossible to get everything inside of his rib cage painted. So I stuffed that as much as I could with tissue paper, and then I used hot glue to fill in the gaps between the ribs and just kind of seal in the tissue paper. I really want this to be closed off, because if I get any liquid material in there like paint or glue and it's unable to dry because it gets surrounded with other materials, it could cause a problem. So I just wanted to make sure that was full. I now needed to figure out the part of the headstone which I knew was going to be one of the most challenging, which is adding the inscription. So I'm using foam clay, and I decided to add glue on the front. I'm not sure if I needed to do that, but I wanted to make sure the foam clay was not coming off. I added white foam clay on top of the foam board, and then I used a paintbrush with some water on it to get it wet, which helps smooth it out quite a bit. And I just then ended up using my finger to smooth it into the sides. I do like using foam clay. I'm not quite sure it was the best choice for having to write something into, because it's a little bit, I don't know how to describe it. It's a little bit rubbery or a little bit balloony to where, like, even after you inscribe something, it wants to push it back out. It wants to kind of self-level. However, it was really easy to erase work that I didn't like. I could just put a little bit of water on my finger and rub over the letters. It took me several times to get some kind of writing that I liked. I didn't even record all of the times that I had to go back over the letters. I ended up needing to add the word Beetlejuice between the two lower skeletons because it was just really hard to get small letters that looked like anything. I let the foam clay dry a little bit, and then once it was dry to the touch, I reinforced the carvings with a ball stylus to make sure it wasn't going to puff itself back out and lose that definition. Next, I could use one of my favorite supplies, which is lightweight spackling, and this helped me fill in any gaps that were between the skeleton bones and the foam board. It also helped me hide the seams between the foam board pieces that were glued together. And overall, it's just going to give everything a more sculpted look, because if all of this was sculpted out of a single piece of stone, everything would be very connected and there wouldn't be deep grooves in between things. It'd be very surface level. After everything dried completely, I could do my first layer of paint, which I always love this part when you see multiple materials coming together as one. The first layer of paint can really make or break, let you know whether you accomplished what you were going for. In this case, it really did help me see where some of the holes were, and so I went back and filled them in with some more lightweight spackling to make sure that everything was looking like one sculpted piece of stone. At first, I thought this was going to be a very quick and easy project, which is why I started it in the live stream. But honestly, the dry times between all of the paint and the glue and the materials that were added made this quite a long project to finish. I did one more layer of gray paint to cover all of my repairs, and then it was time to highlight the words that I had inscribed onto the headstone. Here lies Beetlejuice. And if you are wondering about the spelling and you've never seen the movie, this is actually how Beetlejuice's name is spelled. However, the directors thought that no one would know how to say it correctly on the movie posters, and that is why the movie poster is spelled completely different, as in the word beetle plus the word juice. I didn't want to say it together. I've already said it too many times. And if you're wondering where this spelling that you can see on the headstone comes from, it is actually the name of a star. Continuing with the painting process, I am starting to put in the very deep shadows. So these are going to be shadows in the eye sockets, between the rib bones, in the very deep folds of the wings. And at this point, I realized I was using an unmarked black paint, and I've done this before, but this paint is glossy, and I forget that, and then I end up with glossy black paint on something that should be dark shadows. So I marked it this time, but we're going to continue forward, and this time I'm going to be using something that's not glossy to do a wash with some water and just black acrylic paint. This wash is going to go over everything, but that's why I wanted to do the really deep shadows first so that those would be very, very dark. Once all of that dried, I wanted to add a bit more of a stone look. Many parts of this house have had this speckled treatment. Mostly it's items for Delia, things that Delia has designed, but I thought it would be fun to use on this headstone. And then I used some dry brushing to go over areas that I thought needed a bit more shadow. And really, I just had a lot of fun painting this piece. It's really made of just a few elements, foam board, some clay, and some plastic skeletons, but it ends up having a lot of detail, and so I'm wanting to make sure that that detail can be seen. Here I'm dry brushing with some white acrylic paint so that it highlights the little teeth details in the front of the skeletons, it highlights all the bones, the edges of the wings. And then of course I have to go back over my writing because that red in the movie, it's kind of glowing. So at least here I want to make sure it can be seen well. A friend of mine sent me this regular gel mat, and I'm excited to try it out. I very much trust her crafting knowledge, and she said that this is the most matte like sealant type product that she has tried before. So I'm excited to give it a go. Of course, I am going to use it on the back first because I've never tried this before. I'm really hoping this will take away the glossy shine from my accidental glossy black paint. It did dry really quickly and clear, but I did see some of it built up under that arm bone, and I'm just going to make sure it kind of goes clear after a while. And I was pretty happy with the texture and the finish, so I am going to work on the front. I did notice on the back it says do not use as a top coat, but my guess for that, because after reading the back, is that it can discolor over time. So I'm guessing if you're doing something over like a white paper, it could possibly discolor, but I'm not too worried about it because the older and dingier this piece looks, the better. I also decided it was looking a little bit too smooth on the front, so I'm using this same material and dabbing it with a paper towel. I did have to remove some of it from the letters, but it did make a really cool texture on the front of the stone, and I think it just makes it a little less perfect on the front, which is just what I wanted. I also added a bit of the paper towel dabbing on the top of their heads as well. So here is my finished headstone. In the scene where Beetlejuice's grave appears, it appears in the diorama that Adam had been creating in the attic. So it's kind of like grave inception, because it's a grave and a diorama that's going to have the diorama in the attic that had the grave in it. So it's just like, you know, multiple steps of, you know. But in that scene, when they find the headstone, there are two shovels that appear and just kind of fall down, hinting that they should dig. So I can't move on from this project without making the shovels. Shovels are a pretty easy miniature to find. I've seen them at craft stores that have like a miniature section. However, I'm just going to go ahead and make them. I've never made a shovel before, so I'm excited to give it a go. I am using cardstock here. I have it folded over, and I created the shape of a spade, and then I left a little tab on top that's just about big enough to go around a barbecue stick skewer. You can get these barbecue skewers at the dollar store, at the grocery store, and they're usually fairly cheap. Sometimes they are a little splintery, so just be careful, but they're a great size for many different projects. I glued the skewer down on the edge of my cardstock, and then I glued my spade shape over top, making sure that the tab went down on both sides. Then I cut a large shape around the spade, so just like a square, so I could start manipulating it with my fingers while the glue was still wet. What I'm wanting to do is bend it into more of an angle, and as you can see, it's just naturally making a bit of a wrinkle at the back of the spade. Once I like the shape, I could cut it out of the paper, and then I cut two more tabs at the very top of the new piece of cardstock that I just cut out. So I'm kind of cutting them long and then making sure I'm cutting them all the way up to the skewer. I'm adding glue, and then I'm going to wrap it around the previously glued piece of paper. And this is going to really attach this piece of paper to the previous piece of paper and to the skewer. So now I have my shovel head permanently attached, and I'm going to let that dry. Of course, I made two of these because I need one for Barbara and one for Adam. I cut the skewer down to size, and then I used a piece of sandpaper to round off the end just to give it a bit more of a finished look, so it wasn't like splintering, because usually the ends of shovels are pretty smooth. And now I am going to dip the entire head of the shovel all the way up to the skewer in Mod Podge, and then I'm going to let that drip dry. I'm going to do 2 layers of Mod Podge in this way, letting it dry in between. And if you're wondering how I let these dry without making a huge mess, I used some clamps that are holding on to the skewer, and then I put them over a paint palette to let the Mod Podge drip off. I did kind of have to force some of the final drops to come off because they were starting to dry in place. But if you do have one dry in place, you can kind of sand it down or cut off any of the drips that you don't want. The Mod Podge worked really well to harden the paper, so I'm not worried about it getting bent or anything along those lines. So I added some acrylic paint, and then once a layer of gray paint was dry, I added some silver on top of it to make it look like metal. In the clip, the shovels are not the same color, so I'm going to be painting one red and one brown. And initially I was going to paint them the same color, but I do think they're more interesting that they're different colors. And I need to keep that in mind when I'm doing other scenes, and I think that's a great way that the set decorators for Beetlejuice, maybe those are just the shovels that they found or they already had on set, but I don't know why I love that detail that they're just two different colors. Of course, I had to add a little bit of aging to the shovel because this grave has already been dug by the time you see it in my diorama, so it is going to have some use. Here you can see a before and after, and you can see the detail it adds to the shovel itself. So now I have the headstone done and the shovels done, and I'm pretty happy with the results of both of these projects. Now I did realize, and here's my paper from the live stream, I had traced out the shape of the grave. Since then, Bailey has done a bite test on the paper, just so you know, paper is really fun to bite. But I'm noticing that the headstone is about the same size as the grave, and it's looking a little ridiculous. So I think we're going to have to fix that before this video's over. Before I move on any further, I do want to go over my timeline. I might be running out of time before the ghost appears, so I want to make sure that I have all of this straight in my head. So here's my timeline. I first did an overarching timeline up here, and then I split everything up into individual tasks down here. So essentially these two timelines are the same as this timeline, it's just made bigger. I'm going to use this red Sharpie. I'm going to cross through everything that I have completed. So all foam board complete. First floor and garage complete. That is not done. Charles' study and furniture, no. Sandworm and Netherworld scene, and I put custodian here. I did not realize I planned to make the custodian. I probably don't plan to make him now, so I'm gonna cross through that. Charles and Delia dolls, nope. Delia's room, nope. I did the furniture. It's probably down here on the bigger list. Second floor, hallway, and lighting, that should be done. Okay, so now we're into the new year. So this is where we're at right now. This is us. We are here. So I still have quite a bit I need to catch up on. So this is the expanded timeline. Finish the second floor foam board, done. Finish the attic roof in foam board, done. Create the first floor ceiling, first floor lighting and ceiling. I still need to finish the lighting on the first floor. Finish doors and windows on the first floor, nope. Start making books for Charles' study, I have not done that. Make interiors and shelves for the study. I have not done that. I did do the mini show, and I forgot to look for a dog that would match the dog that causes them to go off the bridge. Oops. Okay, sandworms, done. Beetlegust, make Saturn, done. And I put make monsters, Barbara and Adam, not done. And then I'm not going to make the custodian. And now we're at September. October, make Delia and Charles. I did not make Delia and Charles. Make Delia and Charles bedroom walls and floor. I have not done that, but I did make their bedroom furniture. Build upper hallway and railing. Did not do that. Oh, here we are. This is where we're at. Okay, so that means I still have quite a bit to do to catch up on my timeline. So these are going to be my major focus items to hopefully catch up with where I need to be. Did I do anything else? Nope. I didn't do anything extra, but now I kind of know where I'm at. I really wish I had kept up with this better, but this was kind of an ideal timeline. So now I can take what's left on here and rewrite a new timeline and hopefully stick to that one a little bit better, because I have less than a year to finish this. With this information in my head, I really hope that I get some good information from the Ghost of Projects Future. Yeah, I can see why the Ghost of Projects Present was a little disappointed. Right, so the final step is to install the headstone on my project. I had previously created a hole where the grave was going to sit, but the hole was too small, and I even knew that at the time I created it, but I have a very limited space on the base, and I really thought that that was the biggest that I could make it. But now that the headstone is here, the headstone is way too big. It looks very awkward. So I do need to expand the grave opening before the headstone will look correct. So let's dig into the base. Here is the ghost with the most to show you just how short I originally made this grave opening. And as you can see, I really just don't have a ton of space on the base, but I feel like I can go a little bit further down, so I am going to cut into the previously hardened clay. And I don't know if you remember this video, I did cut this out quite a while ago, but I made kind of a fake interior to show different layers of material that are on the inside. Mostly on the inside, it is a ton of aluminum foil, but I wanted to make it look a little bit more like Adam's model in the movie. So that's why you see me removing quite a bit of tin foil now, and I'm going to add in some chipboard to kind of extend the cardboard look that I already had going. The other areas are going to be covered by some additional clay, and I am going to keep this piece of green land to cut up and make it look like rubble once I'm closer to finishing up the base of this project. So now he fits a little bit better. It's still a tight fit, but it's better than it was, and I feel like it looks much more proportional with the giant headstone. As I said previously, I do want to add to the edges with some clay. I do have this paper clay, but as you can tell, it is hardened. And previously, I thought that this was the end of paper clay. Like once it got to this state, you were pretty much doomed. But I recently had someone tell me that you can reactivate paper clay, and I had no idea. So I am going to attempt to do this, and I am bringing you along with me. So the first thing I did was get a disposable surface, because this does get incredibly messy. And even though it did seem like the paper clay was soaking up the water that I was pouring over it, I felt like it would go faster if I ripped everything into smaller pieces. Now, it wasn't completely rock hard, so I'm not quite sure how you would deal with that, but I was able to tear it into smaller pieces, and it did soak up the water. And as you see, very, very messy. I did several rounds of smushing it. It did end up pretty clumpy, so it's not as smooth as it was when I would have originally used it if I had used the entire clay block. But I am making some landforms, so a little bit of lumpiness is no problem. I added it all around the exterior edge of the gravesite, and then I added some foil on the bottom of my headstone so that I could make a flat area at the top where it will sit. The process of reworking the clay made it very sticky, so the foil was a really good idea so that my headstone didn't get stuck. Once I felt that I had a good platform for it, I removed the aluminum foil, flattened it down again with my finger, and then I decided to do a pin nail and magnet for the headstone, mostly because it will be one of the few things that sticks up from the base, and if I'm moving the house around and I forget that it's on the base, I don't want to break it off. So in order to get the right position for the magnets, because I didn't put the pin nails in very straight, I'm adding a dab of paint on top of the pin nails, and then I'm going to put my headstone on top, and this is going to give me the area that I need to add in my magnets. Once the clay had dried completely, I wanted to make sure my pin nails weren't going to go anywhere, so I added glue all over the top, and then I added a piece of tissue paper over the pin nails, and this is going to act as like a little bit of skin on top of the pin nails to make sure that they won't come out. I now want to blend this entire site into my previously created base, so I'm using the exact same green that I used before. However, I remember I also aged the base, so I'm trying to blend the green into the previous areas. Eventually, everything will be covered in static grass. However, I don't want just like a bright green patch showing through my static grass, so I decided to add some dry brushing with black paint, and I think I did an okay job blending it in. I added the magnets into the base off camera, and I'm going to leave the audio in here so you can hear it click into place. Adding the two magnets in makes this headstone hold very well in place, and if it does get knocked over, I don't have to worry about it being ripped up or torn apart because it will just come apart at the magnetic area. So now I can add in my shovels, and my project here is complete. I am waiting to add the static grass towards the very end of this project so I don't end up crushing it while I'm working on other parts of the house. So at that time I will add more rubble to show that Barbara and Adam actually dug up this grave. I've been saving bits and pieces of this project along the way so I can create that. But for now, I'm happy with this repair. I think it looks so much better, and I'm really happy with the headstone. And honestly, I think Beetlejuice is too. The grave has been extended, the shovels are made, and the headstone is complete. So hopefully now... Are you the ghost of Christmas future? I mean, project's future? Are you here to tell me the fate of my Beetlejuice project? I'm really scared to ask this question. Will I be able to finish my project in time for my deadline in 2026? No! So that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed my attempt to make this video a little bit more festive for this coming Christmas holiday season. This is my last video for 2025, but I am so looking forward to 2026. It is going to be Beetle year. Forget Beetle Gust. It is going to be Beetle year because I am going to be working overtime to make sure that this project gets done. I hope you all have a wonderful December month. I hope you have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Goodbye. So hopefully by the end of this video, I'll be completely No! No! Okay, God. No! Ghost of Project Futures. Ghost of Project's future. Can my fate be changed?